So let's talk about the Necromancer Scourge. So his torch goes ahead and adds 2 abilities. One of them does burning damage and torment damage. Pretty good damage, right? I mean, that's sticking pretty well. His other skill is just a heavy knockdown, and it applies some boons to your allies, and it applies some conditions to some enemies. Pretty much all it does. The knockdown is very interesting on it. 2 seconds knockdown is really big, especially if you don't have a stun break. It can be pretty powerful. Next up, let's talk about his utilities. So his heal skill, and all of his utilities, as a matter of fact, are called punishment skills. So if you ever wanted to add something that reduces cooldown, just look for the key term punishment. Okay, so this applies a big barrier and a pretty good self-heal on yourself, and it removes boons from enemies. So it applies the barrier and the boon removal into a radius of 240 for both 5 allies and 5 enemies. Pretty good. If it's better than consumed conditions, only time will tell. I see it being useful in some ways, but if you take a shit ton of condition damage and Staff 4 is on cooldown and Plague Signet, if you're running it, is just, on cooldown, consumed conditions was always that nice third out, but this is pretty damn strong as well. Here you have Trail of Anguish. This leaves a trail of sand behind you. It grants swiftness and it burns usually. But there's also a boon converted to conditions on enemies that walk past it. This is supposed to, I believe, pulse 6 times. But the swiftness only ticks like twice, and it waits 2 seconds before ticking it the second time. So that's interesting, and it's not mentioned at all, but I found it interesting. Also, this is a stun break. Is it a good stun break is the question. Don't know. Okay, but here you have Desiccate, which feels more of like a very tiny AoE shout from Reaper. Pretty much, you gain might, and you deal a tiny bit of damage, and you convert boons to conditions, and you gain some life force, but this is in a 300 radius. I don't know. Feels kind of gimpy. It's a 1 second cast time too. I mean, the cooldown's short, so that's useful. But I don't know. Feels kind of weird. Here you have Sandswell. This operates kind of like a Mesmer teleport and a Mesmer portal, all crammed into one thing. So, is it better? Well, not strictly, no. Because with a Mesmer portal, you can create a home portal and a mid portal in PvP, and you could just teleport through them. This isn't the same thing. This is like a 900 range, slight form of that. It will get you there faster, but is not the end all and be all. You gain barrier when you travel through it. I don't know if that's useful though. That's like assuming you're using this in an aggressive manner, which I guess you could. You could use it in an aggressive manner, go in with Dagger Torch, slash them up, immobilize them, burn them, create this portal going away from them, which in theory should convert a boon to condition on both sides where it enters. Then you go through it, you swap the staff. Maybe that's a thing. We'll have to see. Here you have Serpent Siphon, which feels like a really weird skill. Let me just show you. If I walk up to a group of wargs, it will deal damage, and it removes a boon, and it will also poison, but it doesn't apply barrier like it says. Instead, what it does is it throws a little orb on the ground. You see that orb? That is what applies the barrier. So if I walked over here and grabbed it, I now have barrier. His last skill is Ghastly Breach. This is his ultimate. So this pulses slow and burning, but then if it converts boons, it will also turn into Torment and Cripple, which everything in this practically does Torment and Cripple. So if you're expecting something different, that's all you're getting. So those were his utilities. So the Scourge has 3 trait lines that he can go for, and each one does a different thing. So the bottom one is all about corrupting boons and making the boons your own. So you have skills that make it where when you corrupt a boon, you gain the boon. Your shades, where you summon 3 of them, those corrupt boons, and you gain life force for the boons you corrupt. The middle one is all about condition damage. So it applies burning when you apply torment, which all of your boon conversion from the Scourge usually applies torment and cripple. That's just something they've been going with for a lot of the skills. It's all about torment and cripple for pretty much everything he does. The top one affects your barriers, and it makes it where you could summon just one tree with the abilities combined from the other 2. So the barrier is pretty good. It also makes it to where you convert conditions into boons on allies. So this is one of the times where you're actually doing something positive instead of negative. You also grant might to people, which is just very small, but still it's kind of interesting. Culminates into what is your Sand Shroud. So what is it and what does it do? So you could summon these 3 shades, which all cripple and torment, and that's without removing a boon. So it's one of the only things that apply cripple and torment without removing boons to begin with. They have a 25 duration, max count of 3, pretty normal stuff. So you have F1, F2, F3, F4, F5. The F5 is maybe one of the most important ones because it applies a big barrier, but it's not just that, it's your Shroud skill. So whenever you're reading something in here, so for instance, in Curses, you have Furious Demise. Gain Fury when entering Shroud. A skill like that, when it says enter Shroud, it means you're F5. So if you went Soul Reaping and you grabbed the top Grandmaster trait that was called Foot in the Grave, that would apply stability and a stun break on your Desert Shroud. So everything that says when you enter a Shroud, they mean you're F5. Other abilities though, like this, Shroud Skill 2 corrupts boons into conditions, that will go on your F2. If it says your F1 will do it, then it means your Manifest Sandshade will do it. So applying vulnerability in Spite, I believe it is, applying that vulnerability occurs with Manifest Sandshade. So his F2 makes it to where you convert conditions into boons, but this is for allies. If you go ahead and grab this in Curses, it's also for enemies. So you boon convert into conditions and you condition convert into boons. It's pretty nice. Your F3 goes ahead and it's just a classic barrier. You click it, you lose life force, you give a barrier. This could give a barrier potentially up to 20 people because it gives it both near your shades and near you. So you can give it up to 20 people. So in World v World, that has some interesting things about it. Your F4 goes ahead and it induces fear in the enemies around you and your Sandshades. So pretty much it's just a fear. It's an instant cast. So something I want to show you guys is your Garish Pillar will actually use Transfusion. So even without creating a Sandshade, I can click F4 and boom, I feared him and I'm gaining health. You see this 630 appearing? That's Transfusion doing its job. So that's pretty nice. So a lot of skills that are in your trait lines goes ahead and affects these guys. So you're going to want to look out for that. Also, another cool thing to mention is Desert Shroud, where it ticks that 7 times. It combos with Blood Shroud, or I'm sorry, Blood Magic. Because Blood Magic have Vampiric and Vampiric Presence. So if I go over to a River Drake and I click F5, you'll see I start hitting them twice for every hit. So the Sandshade, if you had one here, would also do the same. So here you see I'm hitting him with Vampiric Aura and Vampiric Strikes. It's actually pretty nice. You do the same thing with a Manifest Shade. If I was to put one down, you'd probably see double the numbers. Let's try that. Yeah. Look, 6 numbers. So, pretty good. And it also heals you. That can affect up to 5 enemies per pillar you put down. So if you can cover a wide spread, and you could click that Desert Shroud and do a lot. I hope you guys liked my first look into this. I was very hyped. The thing is, when I saw Scourge to begin with, I wasn't sure if I was going to like it or not, because Necro has always been a greedy class, you know? Just always about making himself look like a badass. But I will say this, the support is done in such a way where he is still certainly the badass. He is amazing. The skills look very fun to use, and it looks to be very powerful. He may have an underwhelming or maybe 2 underwhelming utilities, but his trait lines, every single trait line is just worth it 100%. Like I can certainly see every trait line being used for a situation that it wants to be used for, because they have very, very specific niches that they want to fall into. So those were my closing thoughts on the Scourge for now.